United States. Riverton Mental Health Institute, 19 September 2023. Many believe that we are alone in the universe. However, one day something inexplicable happened. Something that forced us to ask ourselves, is this really true? It is the fall of 2023. One of the patients at the Riverton Mental Health Institute, located in the remote wilderness of Wyoming, was Robert Harrison, a middle-aged man who had spent over 3 decades in the facility. At first glance, he appeared to be just over 70, though some believed that time had treated him even worse. His gray hair, once thick, had thinned considerably, and his face, etched with deep lines, bore a look of permanent exhaustion. Yet there was something in his eyes, a sharp, deep gleam, that suggested Harrison had seen things far beyond ordinary experience. Things no one should ever have to witness. Although for decades he had been regarded as just one of many patients suffering from chronic delusions, his story always piqued the interest of a few journalists and paranormal researchers. Most of them left Riverton empty-handed, claiming that the man told the same distorted memories from the past, which were difficult to distinguish from pure fantasy. However, in October 2023, Tom Kinsley, a well-known ufologist who had spent years investigating alleged encounters with extraterrestrial beings, came to the hospital. Tom had conducted dozens of investigations, written scientific articles, and even collaborated with government agencies studying phenomena of unknown origin. Over the years, he had gained a reputation as a serious investigator, someone not easily swayed by hoaxes or paranoid conspiracy theories. Kinsley had heard about Harrison from an old friend, Dr. John Perkins, a psychiatrist who had worked at Riverton for many years. Perkins mentioned a particular patient, an older man who had claimed for years that he had made contact with alien beings, and that his life had changed forever during one night in 1983. It was this story that deeply fascinated Kinsley. Although the ufologist usually approached such tales with skepticism, he decided it was worth taking a closer look. Something in Perkins' tone suggested that Harrison's case might be different, that it might hold more than just the usual psychotic fantasy. Harrison's story began in the early 1980s. At the time, as a man in his 30s, he led a quiet life. He was an auto mechanic in a small town somewhere in southern Wyoming, had a home, a family, and a small community with whom he maintained regular contact. From the accounts of other residents, he was a simple man, not too involved in public life, and showed no tendencies toward eccentricity or emotional outbursts. His life followed a set routine until that fateful night in August 1983, a night that changed everything. Tom Kinsley spent several days preparing for his conversation with Harrison. He studied all available documents, searched the archives for events from the 1980s in the Riverton area, and gathered numerous reports of mysterious lights seen in the sky that night. The case was shrouded in mystery, and official reports said little about the strange incidents, though a few witnesses mentioned unknown atmospheric phenomena. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Kinsley was led to a small, chilly interrogation room in the hospital's main building. The walls were covered in gray, peeling tiles, and the air smelled of dampness and disinfectant. As Kinsley sat down and prepared his recorder, the door slowly opened, and Robert Harrison entered the room. He was emaciated, almost wasted away. His face showed the toll that years of isolation and medication had taken on him. Despite this, something in his posture and gaze suggested that he was still fully aware and lucid. His tired yet gleaming eyes carefully observed Tom, as if trying to assess whether he could trust him. As he sat across from the ufologist, Harrison gave him a brief, scrutinizing look, but said nothing. Kinsley decided to start calmly and gently. He asked Harrison about his childhood, his youth, trying to build a connection and establish trust. As expected, Harrison responded sparingly, with little interest. But when Kinsley asked about the events of 1983, something in the man changed. His eyes lit up, as if he came alive at the memory of that night. It seemed like he hadn't had anyone to talk to about his experiences for a long time. And now, after so many years, he felt that Kinsley might be the one to listen and understand. It was late August in 1983. Harrison began quietly, staring at the wall. I was driving home late at night. The road cut through the woods, and the sky was as clear as crystal. I remember stopping for a moment to light a cigarette. Suddenly, something strange appeared in the sky. There were lights, not like an airplane or helicopter, but something that moved too fast and too silently. Harrison paused for a moment, as if he was reliving those events again. Kinsley remained silent, knowing the patient needed time to gather his thoughts. At first, I thought it was some new military technology, something they were testing, because you'd hear rumors about military bases nearby from time to time. But then the lights started coming closer to me. The car suddenly died, like something had cut the power. I felt like I was plunged into a deep, terrifying silence. And that's when I saw them. Harrison described the beings he claimed to have seen that night. Slender, silvery figures that were neither human nor animal. Their eyes, they looked straight through me, through my skin, through my mind. It was like they knew everything about me. Harrison fell silent for a moment, his eyes glowing with a more intense light, as if the memory of that night was etched into his mind with a painful precision. Tom Kinsley sat motionless, staring at the man's face. For a moment, the room was silent, but the tension in the air was almost palpable. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was quiet, but filled with emotion. Their eyes were... I've never seen anything like it. They were large, black, with no whites. But somehow they seemed to shine. When I looked into them, I felt like I was losing myself. Like my thoughts, my memories, everything I had ever experienced became available to them. It wasn't just a look, it was something more. I felt like they were seeing through my skin, through my body, straight into my mind, as if they knew every secret, every dream, every deepest thought I had. I was naked before them, but not in the literal sense. It was more terrifying than that. They knew everything about me. Harrison took a breath, as if recalling these memories was physically painful. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I stood there on the side of the road, and they just kept coming closer. They didn't move like they were walking. There were no steps. They simply floated through the air. Their skin, it was silvery, shimmering like metal, but not cold. It was something organic, yet mechanical at the same time. I only saw them for a moment, but that moment lasted an eternity. Tom held his breath. Descriptions of similar beings weren't new to him. Such accounts appeared in many cases around the world. But what Harrison was saying about the gaze of these beings, about this deep, almost telepathic connection, was something new. "What happened next?" he asked, trying not to pressure Harrison but unable to hide his interest. Harrison looked at him, as if debating whether to continue. After a moment, he went on. Before I understood what was happening, everything around me started spinning. I felt strange vibrations in the air, as if the ground and the air around me were trembling. The car, the trees, even the air seemed to pulsate, like something massive was coming, like the world around me had ceased to exist, and I was suspended in a void. Then, there was only light. "Light?" Tom asked. "Yes," Harrison confirmed, closing his eyes as if trying to describe what he saw was exhausting. A blinding, white light that filled everything. I felt my body lift off the ground, like I stopped existing in a physical sense. It was, on one hand, terrifying, but on the other, strangely soothing. I felt like I was part of something bigger, like they were trying to, synchronize me with something beyond my understanding. Tom sat still, absorbing every word. Harrison was describing what the ufology community called the suspension phenomenon, a state in which witnesses feel detached from reality, where time loses its meaning, and they feel literally lifted by an unseen force. This wasn't typical of mere UFO sightings, but rather aligned with accounts from those claiming abduction. "What happened next?" Tom asked, careful not to break the delicate rhythm of Harrison's narrative. "I was on their ship," Harrison said, his voice starting to tremble. "I couldn't see anything clearly. It was dark around me, but I felt like I was being watched. It felt like something unknown, something huge, was all around me. The only thing I remember clearly is the sound. It wasn't a normal sound. It was more like a vibration, a deep, pulsing wave that went through my entire body. It was everywhere and in everything. It's hard to describe. It felt like a signal, like they were trying to calibrate me." "Calibrate?" Kinsley was intrigued. "Yes," Harrison confirmed, growing more fascinated by his own memories. "It was like tuning, as if they were preparing me for something. And then the images began. I saw things I couldn't understand. Pictures of planets that didn't look like Earth. Technology I couldn't even imagine. I felt like what they were showing me was more than just images. It was information. They were sending it directly into my brain." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. Information being transmitted directly to the mind. Reports of telepathy had appeared in many UFO encounters, but this description felt more intense. Harrison wasn't talking about a mere physical interaction, but a mental one. Could these beings he described really possess the ability to transfer knowledge in such a way? "Did you understand what they were showing you?" Kinsley asked. Harrison shook his head. "Number not then, it was like a flood. Too much information at once. I felt like my brain was splitting, like something inside me was breaking. The images, the sounds, the vibrations. It was all too intense. But something stayed with me. As if part of that knowledge still exists inside me, waiting for a moment when I can finally comprehend it." Tom reflected on what those words could mean. "Have you ever tried to go back to those memories, to understand what they showed you?" "Many times," Harrison said, his voice growing more weary. "I've tried for years, but something changed in me after that night. I started having dreams, visions, as if what they showed me was trying to surface, but I could never fully grasp it. And then the problems started. People didn't want to believe me. I started telling others what happened, and soon I was labeled insane. That's when I ended up here." Harrison lowered his gaze, his voice tinged with resignation. "For decades, they've kept me in this place. Over time, I started doubting what I saw, but deep down, I always knew it was real. They're out there, Tom. And I'm not the only one who knows. There are others. People who have seen the same thing, but most of us have been silenced, locked away in places like this so no one will ever learn the truth." Kinsley remained silent, trying to process what he had just heard. Harrison didn't seem crazy. His story, though it sounded like something straight out of a science fiction film, was coherent, full of detail, and incredibly convincing. Tom sat in silence, feeling the weight of Harrison's words. This conversation was different from any he'd had before. Accounts of encounters with extraterrestrials were often chaotic, riddled with inconsistencies, but Harrison's story had something hypnotic about it, something unsettling, yet deeply fascinating. After a moment of quiet, Tom decided to ask the question that had been nagging at him from the start. "Did anyone else, apart from you, see these beings? Was there anyone who could confirm your story?" Harrison lifted his gaze, his eyes once again gleaming with that strange light. "That's the problem, Tom. There was no one. I was alone. When I came back to reality, I was back on the road, beside my car. No one saw what happened. No one was there to believe me. I tried telling people, but everyone treated me like a madman. Even my closest friends started distancing themselves. And then came the fear." Tom leaned forward, intrigued by this new thread. "Fear? Fear of what?" Harrison fell silent, as if carefully weighing each word. "They started watching me," he finally said. "Not the aliens, people, ordinary people, but with something off about them. I had this feeling they knew what happened to me, that they knew more about it than I did. There were a few of them, in suits. Sometimes I'd see them on the street when I was walking to work, sometimes in the cafe I used to go to. They always kept their distance, but I could feel their presence, and I knew it wasn't a coincidence. You think they were from the government? Tom tried to grasp where Harrison was heading. I'm not sure. But whatever it was, they didn't want me talking about what I saw. Once I tried confronting one of them. I walked up to him when I saw him standing across from my apartment. When I asked who he was and why he was following me, he just turned and walked away. Didn't say a word. And that's when other things started. Strange phone calls in the middle of the night, noises I couldn't explain. A shiver ran down Tom's spine. These stories sounded like the mysterious men in black. Tales he'd heard in ufology circles, shadowy agents whose purpose was to silence witnesses and cover up any evidence related to UFOs. But those stories were so elusive, so hard to believe. Are you saying someone tried to intimidate you into staying quiet about your experience? Exactly, Harrison confirmed, drawing in a deep breath. But it wasn't just intimidation. It was more than that. They felt like shadows, like they were always one step behind me. Whenever I walked down the street, I felt like they were watching my every move. And then, I realized it wasn't just the aliens who chose me. Someone else, someone from this world, knew about their existence too. And they did everything they could to make sure my story never saw the light of day. Tom leaned back in his chair, trying to collect his thoughts. And that's why you ended up here, at Riverton. Harrison smiled bitterly. That was their best move. When I started speaking openly about what happened to me, people thought I was losing my mind. I began telling my colleagues, my friends, and soon enough, I ended up in this place. They said I was delusional, that it was due to trauma or stress. Everyone decided I'd gone crazy, but I knew it was part of a bigger plan, to lock me up here, isolate me, so I'd never reveal what really happened. Tom inhaled sharply through clenched teeth. Harrison's story, though improbable, was starting to fall into a pattern, a familiar one. Contact with aliens, observation by mysterious individuals, and eventual confinement in a psychiatric facility. It sounded like a conspiracy theory, yet there was a sincerity to it that made it hard to dismiss outright. So, do you believe the aliens, are still watching you? That they still have some influence over you? Tom asked, trying to gauge Harrison's current mental state. The man looked at him with a cryptic smile. They never stopped. Sometimes at night, I wake up and feel their presence. What they showed me, what they did to me, didn't end that night. It's ongoing. Sometimes I feel like I'm just part of something bigger, an experiment that's been going on for years. Maybe that's why I'm here. Maybe it's safer this way. Experiment? Tom leaned in toward Harrison, eager for more details. What kind of experiment? Harrison paused for a moment, then looked directly at Tom, as if trying to decide whether he could trust him. I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like it's more than just a study. They want something from us. Maybe from our minds, maybe from our bodies. But one thing I know for sure. I'm not the only one. There are more of us. And they're watching, waiting for something to happen. Something I still don't understand. The silence that followed those words was heavy. Tom could feel that the conversation had reached a place where reality clashed with the unknown. On one hand, he could dismiss it all as the fantasy of a disturbed man, but on the other, there was something about this story that made it impossible to ignore. Have you ever tried to contact them? Tom asked, breaking the silence. Harrison looked at him with a faint smile. I don't have to, Tom. They're always close. Sometimes I feel them, sometimes they feel me. But one thing I know for sure, whatever happened back in 1983, it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something bigger, something that's yet to come. Tom Kinsley sat in silence for a moment, trying to keep his emotions in check. With every word Harrison spoke, the story seemed increasingly real, as if the improbable fragments were slowly forming a coherent picture. Harrison didn't look like a madman. There was desperation in his eyes, but also a certainty that Tom didn't expect from someone who had spent 30 years in a psychiatric institution. "You say this is just the beginning. What do you mean by that?" Tom finally asked, sensing that Harrison had more to reveal. Harrison hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much more he could disclose. Then he took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, as though preparing himself to share a difficult truth. "You know, Tom," he began slowly, "I've always wondered why they chose me. At first, I thought I was just a random victim, that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as the years passed, I started seeing patterns, connections, and I began having these dreams. They weren't normal nightmares. They were visions." Tom leaned in slightly, intrigued. "Visions? What kind of visions?" Harrison opened his eyes and looked at Tom with an intensity that made him freeze in place. "Visions of the future. At first, they were chaotic, like my mind was trying to piece together fragments that didn't fit. I saw images of ruined cities, people wandering the streets, entire societies collapsing into chaos. But the worst part wasn't about Earth. It was something more." "What did you see?" Tom asked, sensing they were approaching the key point of the conversation. "I saw their return," Harrison replied, his voice dropping to a quiet, fearful tone. "I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I know we're not alone in this universe. And what started in 1983 was just a prelude to something bigger. Something is coming." What they showed me was a warning, not just for me, for all of humanity. A chill ran down Tom's spine. He had heard of such prophecies before, but they were usually dismissed as loose, apocalyptic conspiracy theories, without any foundation. Yet there was something in Harrison's voice that made the growing sense of dread in Tom impossible to shake. "When you talk about their return, what exactly do you mean? Do you think they'll come back to destroy us? Are we in danger?" Harrison closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I don't know exactly what they plan, but it won't be the way we imagine it. They're one step ahead of us. They don't need wars like we do. They don't need weapons. They can destroy us on a level we can't even comprehend. They can influence our minds, our thoughts. They've already done it. Our world is slowly becoming theirs, and most people don't even notice." Tom felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. Theories about aliens influencing human minds were not only terrifying but hard to grasp. Yet Harrison spoke about them with such conviction, as if he truly knew something that no one else could see. "You're saying they're already here? That they somehow control our world?" Tom asked, trying to grasp the complexity of this theory. "They're not controlling, not yet, but they're preparing us for something. They're testing us. Do you think all those UFO sightings, those encounters, are random? It's all part of a bigger plan. They're watching us, studying our reactions, seeing how far they can go. It could be a process that's been going on for decades, or centuries, but I feel like we're nearing the end of this phase. Something is about to change. Soon." "How do you know this?" Tom asked, unable to hide his mix of fascination and fear. Harrison was silent for a moment before speaking softly. "They still come to me. Not directly, but in dreams. They appear. They give me fragments of information. I don't know exactly how it works, but something inside me is connected to them. Sometimes, I feel like they're using me as an antenna, signals passing through my mind without my consent. They show me things that haven't happened yet. Maybe that's how they're preparing us, not just me, but all who've had contact with them." Tom's breathing quickened. This all seemed impossible, yet Harrison described it with such certainty that it was hard to ignore. He recalled other testimonies he'd heard over the years, witnesses claiming they had been chosen by extraterrestrial beings to transmit messages. Was Harrison another piece in that larger puzzle? "What am I supposed to do with this?" Tom finally asked, feeling like he was at a crossroads. "If what you're saying is true, what can I even do?" Harrison gave a sad smile, his face suddenly looking older, more tired. "Tom, this isn't about you. You're just documenting what's happening. I'm just a tool too. But there are others trying to do something. People who know more than you think. Governments, the military, secret organizations. They know a change is coming. They're trying to control it, but they can't. You can't control something you don't understand." Tom didn't know what to say. On one hand, he wanted to dismiss this conversation as the product of a disturbed mind. But on the other hand, he felt Harrison was telling the truth. Maybe not literally, but Tom was convinced that this man had experienced something the world wasn't ready to accept. What happens now?" Tom asked, feeling the weight of responsibility for everything he'd heard. Harrison took a deep breath and looked at him with something like relief. "Now? Now we wait. I've come to terms with it. But you, Tom, have a choice. You can walk away and forget this conversation ever happened. Or you can try to uncover the truth. But know this, if you choose to go down that path, there's no turning back. The world as you know it will cease to exist." Tom sat in silence, staring at Harrison. A cold sweat ran down his back. Time in the small, cool interview room seemed to stand still. Harrison, the old man with faded eyes, had stopped speaking, as if his story was finished. But Tom knew this wasn't just a story. It was a warning, perhaps even more than that. "What will happen if I decide to pursue this?" Tom finally asked, breaking the silence that felt like it had lasted an eternity. Harrison smiled weakly, his face looking even more wrinkled and exhausted. "I don't know exactly what awaits you, Tom. None of us do. Anyone who gets close to the truth ends up hidden, ignored, or removed. But one thing is certain. If you walk this path, you'll have to be ready for everything you believe in to be tested." Tom took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He felt he couldn't just walk away from this. Maybe Harrison was just an old man who had spent too many years in isolation. But something in his story had touched something deep within Tom. An ancient, primal fear of the unknown that everyone carries within themselves. "Are you saying they can find me?" Tom asked, his voice growing quieter, as if afraid someone might overhear. Harrison nodded slowly, his lips curling into a thin smile. "They've already found you, Tom. You're here, in Riverton, talking to me. Do you think that's a coincidence? You didn't seek out this conversation, did you? It found you. It works both ways. When you step into their world, they already know about you." A wave of fear swept through Tom's body. Could it really be possible? Was he being watched? Were there not only them, but also humans, those secret forces Harrison mentioned, following him? Instead of finding answers, Tom felt like his life was being pulled into something beyond his control. "And what about you?" Tom suddenly asked. "Why do they let you live? If you know so much?" Harrison smiled, his face twisting into a grimace that could be interpreted as resignation. "Maybe it's part of the game. Maybe they know no one will believe me. That I'm safe here, locked away, far from the world where no one takes me seriously. Maybe it's part of their plan. Or maybe I'm no longer important to them. But you, Tom, you have something I no longer possess." Tom stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Harrison's eyes softened. "Hope. What is it?" Tom asked anxiously. "Freedom," Harrison replied slowly, his eyes glowing again with that strange light. "You still have a choice. I lost mine a long time ago." Tom felt the conversation drawing to a close, but a flood of questions filled his mind. All the theories he had once laughed at now seemed far more real. more threatening. He stood up slowly, heading for the door, as if moving his body could free him from the weight of the story he had just heard. But before he touched the handle, he stopped and looked back at Harrison. "What happens if I choose not to go down this path?" he asked again, hoping Harrison could offer some kind of relief, another way out. Harrison looked at him calmly as if he knew that the answer was already in Tom's head. "If you walk away now, you'll be able to live like everyone else. You'll continue your podcast, maybe even find success. But you'll never know what really happened. You'll sleep peacefully, but your curiosity will slowly eat away at you. That's what brought you here, right? Curiosity is stronger than fear." Tom stood still, wrestling with his thoughts. Harrison was right. Curiosity had always been his driving force, and now, after this conversation, he knew he couldn't just turn his back and forget. He had always wanted answers, and now, standing on the edge of the truth, he realized there was no going back. "Thanks, Robert," he finally said, placing his hand on the door handle. "Don't thank me, Tom. Not yet." He left the room, and the door closed with a soft click behind him. The hallways of the psychiatric hospital seemed darker now, as if Harrison's story had cast a shadow over everything Tom saw. As he passed the nurses, he could feel their eyes on him, as if everyone in this place knew something he had yet to understand. He got into his car and headed home, but a new plan was already forming in his mind. Instead of ending this journey, Tom decided to go further. He wanted to find out who the people watching Harrison were, what really happened that night in 1983, and why they were coming back. As he pulled out of the parking lot, his phone buzzed. An incoming text. Tom glanced at the screen. The message was short, from an unknown number. "Watch what you do next." Tom's heart raced. He had been warned. Someone was watching him. What had started as a journalistic investigation had turned into something far bigger and more dangerous. Harrison had been right. There was no turning back now. He made his decision. It was time to uncover the truth. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. If you have your own story, experiences, or evidence related to UFOs, please email us. Your story is important and can help others who have had similar experiences. UFO X-Files connects us. You are not alone.